Why is a dead man still being paid? I asked, and every alpha at the table stopped laughing. 10 seconds earlier, nobody had been listening to me. That was normal. I was Ryan Carter, 25 years old, Omega, professional expert in being underestimated by men who owned watches worth more than my apartment. Dominic Hayes had brought me to the private dining room of an old Chicago hotel for what he called a family business dinner. I had learned that when Dominic said family, he meant 20 wealthy men in dark suits who spoke quietly, watched everything, and somehow made expensive steak feel like a board meeting. Dominic sat at the head of the table, 36, calm, broad-shouldered, and so naturally authoritative that people lowered their voices when he looked at them. I sat 2 seats away because Dominic had insisted. Several people had opinions about that. Still keeping the Omega close? Trevor Mills had joked earlier. Another alpha smiled into his wine. Maybe Ryan is Dominic's emotional support accountant. I had smiled politely. I prefer decorative financial accessory. That earned a few laughs. Better to make the joke first. It gave people less room to think they had discovered something about me. Then Trevor slid a folder across the table. Here, Carter. Maybe you can count something for us. He meant it as entertainment. Unfortunately for him, I could count. I opened the folder. Payroll summaries. Vendor records. Routine corporate paperwork from one of the Hayes family's legitimate logistics companies. Nothing exciting, which was exactly why the problem stood out. One employee number appeared 3 times across 11 months of reports. Same last name. Same routing reference. Regular payments. I read the name again. Michael Avery. Something about it bothered me. I had seen it before in an archived personnel list Dominic had asked me to organize months ago. I looked toward Trevor. Michael Avery still works for the company? Trevor shrugged. Probably. No, said an older alpha across the table. He died last year. Silence arrived so quickly it almost had weight. I turned the page. Another payment. Same amount. Another month. Then another. Dominic leaned forward slightly. Ryan. His voice changed when he was serious. What did you find? Maybe nothing. You do not say maybe nothing with that face. I looked at him. What face? The one where you stop making jokes. Irritating man. Accurate man, but irritating. I pushed the folder toward the center of the table. Michael Avery received payments every month for 11 months after his death. Someone scoffed. Accounting error. Could be. I tapped another page. Except the payments do not go to the same destination. The room became quieter. Dominic reached for the folder. I stopped him with one finger on the page. There is more. Trevor folded his arms. Of course there is. I ignored him. 2 other former employees had similar patterns. One had moved to Arizona 18 months ago. Another had resigned almost 2 years earlier. Small payments. Different companies. Different dates. Almost invisible unless somebody was boring enough to compare old payroll records for fun. Lucky them. I was extremely boring. Dominic watched my expression instead of the paperwork. What are you thinking? I checked the dates again. Then I noticed something I wished I had not. Each payment happened within 24 hours of a change in Dominic's schedule. A canceled meeting. A different hotel. A switched vehicle reservation. Individually, meaningless. Together, not meaningless at all. My stomach tightened. I looked around the table at men who had spent the evening laughing because they thought an Omega could not possibly understand their world. Then I looked at Dominic. This is not payroll fraud. Nobody laughed now. Dominic's eyes narrowed. Then what is it? I turned the folder toward him and pointed to the dates. Someone has been using these payments to confirm information about where you are going. Dominic went completely still. I hated when my instincts were right. And whoever is doing it, I said quietly, has been inside your system for almost a year. For 3 full seconds, nobody at the table moved. Then Dominic closed the folder and looked at the men around him. No one leaves. His voice stayed calm, which somehow made the room feel smaller. Trevor shifted in his chair. You seriously think someone is selling your schedule because of 3 weird payroll entries? I think Ryan noticed something none of us noticed, Dominic said. That is enough for me. I looked at him. That was unexpectedly supportive. Do not ruin the moment. I was going to frame it. A few people looked irritated. Good. Irritated people often revealed more than comfortable people. I pulled the folder back toward me and checked the payment dates again. 11 months. 3 former employees. Small amounts. Different destinations. The transfers were too neat to be careless and too small to attract attention. I need access to the schedule archive, I said. One of the older alphas frowned. You need what? Dominic's calendar history. Meeting changes, vehicle reservations, hotel bookings, anything adjusted within 48 hours of these payments. That is private information, so is being quietly monitored for a year. Dominic glanced toward his assistant near the wall. Give him access. The older alpha stared. Dominic, give him access. That ended the discussion. A laptop appeared in front of me several minutes later. I opened the calendar archive and started comparing dates. The first payment matched a last-minute change from a downtown hotel to a private club. The second appeared the evening before Dominic switched airports for a business trip. The third came after a dinner location changed because of a scheduling conflict. My pulse climbed with every match. I hated patterns that wanted to be found. They usually meant somebody believed no one smart enough would look. How many? Dominic asked. 7 so far. Trevor leaned over slightly. 7 what? 7 payments that happened shortly after someone inside the organization learns Dominic's schedule changed. Coincidence? Maybe. I looked at him. Would you like me to keep going until coincidence gets embarrassed? Trevor sat back. I continued. Payment 8. New company. Payment 9. Another route change. Payment 10. A meeting moved from one office to another. Then payment 11. That one made me stop. Dominic noticed immediately. What? This date. I turned the laptop toward him. You changed your schedule twice that day. Chicago to Milwaukee, then back to Chicago. Who knew about the second change? Dominic thought for a moment. Very few people. How few? His expression tightened. 6. The room changed. Nobody had moved, but suddenly everyone became aware of everyone else. I looked around the table. 6 people. 6 possible access points. Several of them were sitting less than 10 feet from me. I forced myself to breathe normally. There is another problem. Dominic waited. These payments are not stealing money. Trevor frowned. You already said that. I know. I am saying something worse now. I opened the vendor records linked to the transfers. 3 shell companies. All of them inactive except for these tiny deposits. The payments behave like markers. Dominic leaned closer. Explain. Someone sends a small amount after receiving useful information. Not enough money to matter. Just enough to confirm the information reached the right person. The older alpha across from me slowly put down his glass. You are saying someone is getting paid for updates. I am saying someone is confirming updates. I looked at Dominic. And there is a difference. His eyes stayed on mine. What difference? Payment means the money is the reward. I tapped the screen. Confirmation means the real transaction is information. Nobody spoke. I scrolled farther through the schedule archive and found a pattern I had not expected. The transfers did not happen after every change. Only after changes involving Dominic personally. Never general staff. Never secondary executives. Never routine deliveries. Just him. They are not watching the company, I said. Dominic's expression hardened. They are watching me. Yes. The word came out quieter than I intended. Trevor finally stopped looking amused. Why? I checked the dates again, then the names attached to calendar permissions. 6 people. 6 trusted insiders. One of them had accessed nearly every altered schedule before the confirming payments appeared. I stared at the screen. Dominic saw my face change. Ryan. I looked up. The leak is not somewhere inside your organization. I turned the laptop so he could see the access list. The leak is inside this room. The room became very quiet after I said it. Not shocked quiet. Dangerous quiet. The kind where everyone suddenly remembers exactly where everyone else is sitting. Dominic did not look at the 6 names on the screen first. He looked at me. How certain are you? Certain enough that I would not say it if I was guessing. Trevor glanced around the table. Then one of us is feeding someone information. Maybe, I said. Or one of you is being used without realizing it. That bought me 6 different reactions. Defensive. Offended. Confused. One man looked angry. Another looked genuinely afraid. The oldest alpha at the table, Victor Shaw, did something more interesting. He stayed perfectly calm. Victor had known Dominic since before I entered this family circle. Silver hair. Expensive suit. Quiet voice. He was the kind of man nobody interrupted because nobody needed to. We should examine every access log, Victor said. Immediately. Reasonable suggestion. Almost too reasonable. Dominic nodded once. Ryan decides what we examine. Several heads turned toward me. Apparently being decorative had been canceled for the evening. I want the original calendar logs, I said. not summaries. I also want the company access records, vendor invoices, and every request connected to the 3 payment accounts. Trevor frowned. That could take hours. Then I recommend coffee. Dominic almost smiled. Victor did not. The laptop chimed before anyone could say more. Dominic's assistant crossed the room quickly and handed him a phone. Dominic read the message, and his expression changed. What happened? I asked. 2 business locations reported access problems within the last 10 minutes. My stomach tightened. Which locations? A warehouse office near Cicero and the legal records office downtown. Trevor stood halfway up. That cannot be a coincidence. Sit down, Dominic said. Trevor sat. I looked back at the payment dates. Something about the timing bothered me. If the person leaking information had realized we were checking records, creating 2 separate problems would do. One useful thing. It would force Dominic to divide his attention. Do not send anyone yet, I said. One of the alphas stared at me. Those are important locations. Exactly. I turned to Dominic. Who received both alerts? His assistant checked. Senior operations, legal, security leadership, and Mr. Hayes. Everyone who matters. Dominic understood before I finished. Distraction? Possibly. I hated that word tonight. It kept becoming yes. Dominic asked his assistant to verify both reports independently through normal business contacts. No rushing. No dramatic exits. Just confirmation. That made me breathe easier. The older alpha beside Victor shook his head. We are sitting here while someone interferes with our businesses because an Omega thinks it is a distraction. There it was. I had almost missed the casual disrespect. Almost. You are right, I said. He blinked. I am. Absolutely. You should ignore me completely and do exactly what an unknown person appears to want you to do. Trevor coughed into his hand. Dominic looked down, probably hiding a smile. The alpha leaned back, annoyed. Ryan, Dominic said. What are you seeing? I studied the access list again. 6 people had permission to view his schedule, but permission was not the same as actual access. I filtered by date. 5 names appeared irregularly. 1 name appeared almost every time. Victor Shaw. My pulse skipped. That did not make him guilty. Senior advisors checked schedules. Normal. Except Victor had accessed Dominic's calendar several times when he had no scheduled meeting with him. I checked another date. Same thing. Then another. Victor noticed me looking at him. His expression remained gentle. Is something wrong? I am deciding. Deciding what? Whether a pattern means what it looks like. Dominic went still. Victor folded his hands on the table. Be careful with accusations, Ryan. His tone was kind. Too kind. I agree. I turned the laptop away from everyone. That is why I am not making one. Dominic watched me closely. What do you need? Questions. Ask them. I looked around the table. Nobody explains themselves. Nobody volunteers anything. I ask, you answer. Trevor frowned. What kind of questions? Boring ones. I smiled faintly. Those are usually the useful kind. I started with hotel bookings. Vehicle changes. Who approved dinner locations? Who remembered an airport switch from 8 months ago? The answers sounded ordinary until Victor corrected a detail no one had mentioned. That was O'Hare, not Midway, he said. Silence. I had never said which airport had changed. Dominic slowly turned toward him. Victor's face lost just enough color for me to notice. There it was. Not proof. Not yet. But the first crack. I looked at Dominic. Now we have a real problem. Victor Shaw did not look away from me. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was Dominic. He had gone completely still, which I had learned was worse than anger. Ryan, he said quietly, explain. I kept my eyes on Victor. I never said which airport changed. Victor leaned back in his chair. You were discussing Dominic's travel history. O'Hare was the obvious assumption. No, I said. It was not. Trevor looked between us. Why not? Because Dominic uses both airports depending on the trip. 8 months ago, the switch was buried inside a schedule revision. Nobody mentioned the original airport tonight. I finally looked at Dominic. Someone would only know that detail if they had seen the internal calendar. Victor's expression remained composed. And as you already established, I had access. Exactly. Then this proves nothing. Correct. That answer surprised him. It surprised everyone, apparently. I could almost hear the room thinking. You are agreeing with him? Trevor asked. I am agreeing with reality. Suspicion is not evidence. Dominic's gaze stayed on me. What would be evidence? I closed the laptop. Records that cannot explain themselves away. The older alpha beside Victor scoffed. You sound very confident for someone Dominic introduced as an operations assistant. I hated that sentence more than I wanted to admit. Not because it was cruel, because it was technically true. Dominic had never known the whole story. Nobody here had. That had been the point. I had spent years building a quieter life. Predictable invoices. Vendor. Schedules. Problems that ended when the spreadsheet balanced. Tonight had apparently decided peace was overrated. Dominic noticed my hesitation. Ryan. I rubbed one hand over my face. I used to do forensic accounting. Silence again. Trevor blinked. You mean audits? Not exactly. I looked at the table. Fraud investigations. Internal financial reviews. Compliance cases. Sometimes companies hired my firm because money was disappearing. Sometimes because information was moving somewhere it should not. Dominic stared at me. You told me you worked in corporate finance. I did. You left out a significant adjective. I was hoping to preserve some mystery. Nobody laughed this time. I sighed. I spent 5 years tracing transactions people deliberately designed to look boring. Payroll fragments. Vendor payments. Duplicate invoices. False reimbursements. The kind of things everyone ignores because the amounts are too small to feel important. Victor's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. I noticed. Of course I noticed. That was the problem with old instincts. Once they woke up, they refused to go back to sleep. Dominic leaned toward me. Why did you stop? The question landed differently than the others. Softer. Personal. I looked down at the closed laptop. Because eventually I stopped seeing numbers as numbers. What did you see? Intent. I swallowed. Every strange payment became a lie. Every missing receipt became a question. Every person became someone I was quietly evaluating. I forced a small smile. It is exhausting being professionally suspicious. Dominic's expression changed. Not pity. Thank God. Something closer to understanding. So you left. I left. I found normal operations work. I learned to enjoy purchase orders. I became emotionally attached to color-coded spreadsheets. Trevor gave a weak laugh. That explains a lot. I contain layers. Dominic ignored him. And tonight. I looked toward the folder again. Tonight looks exactly like the kind of thing I used to investigate. The room seemed to contract around that sentence. Victor folded his hands. Then investigated. Calm. Polite. Almost challenging. I opened the laptop again. I intend to. Dominic turned toward his assistant. Ryan gets complete access to the business records connected to these payments. Several people spoke at once. Dominic raised one hand. Silence returned. Complete access, he repeated. If he asks for a file, he gets it. I stared at him. You realize half this room already thinks giving an Omega financial authority is the beginning of civilization collapsing. Dominic looked at the men around us. Then civilization can collapse quietly while Ryan works. That time, Trevor actually laughed. Even I almost did. Almost. Then Dominic's assistant placed another report beside me. 3 vendor accounts. 12 months of transfers. One name appeared as approving advisor on every exception request. Victor Shaw. My humor disappeared. I looked at Dominic, then at Victor. I think we just found where the real investigation begins. Victor Shaw's name sat on the page 12 times. Not once. Not twice. 12. I stared at it long enough for the letters to stop looking like a name and start looking like a pattern. That is inconvenient, I said. Trevor leaned forward. Inconvenient. I am trying to avoid saying catastrophic until I have coffee. Dominic ignored the joke. What does it mean? I slid the report toward him. Victor approved every exception connected to the 3 vendor accounts. Victor did not flinch. Because those accounts were assigned to my division. That would explain access, I said. It would not explain timing. His eyes narrowed. Good. We were finally getting somewhere honest. Dominic turned slightly toward him. Timing of what? I opened the transaction history again. The payments were never random. They appeared after schedule changes. But there is another layer. I filtered the records by amount. The numbers repeated in small variations. $900, $1,200, $750. Never enough to attract attention. Never enough to matter to a company this size. If someone wanted to steal money, this would be an absurd way to do it. Trevor frowned. Then why move it at all? Because the money is not the point. I enlarged the dates. These transfers are markers. Confirmation. Signals. The older alpha across from me looked skeptical. That sounds dramatic. It is accounting, Everything sounds dramatic if you hate spreadsheets. Dominic almost smiled. Victor did not. I continued. Someone receives internal information about Dominic. A payment goes out afterward. The amount does not matter. The existence of the payment confirms the information was received and accepted. Dominic's expression hardened. Accepted by whom? That is what I am trying to find. I pulled up the vendor registration records. 3 companies. Different names. Different addresses. Same formation agent. Same mailing service. Same legal representative. There it was. One thread pretending to be 3. These companies are connected. Dominic leaned closer. To what? Not to a competitor directly. I scrolled through the filings. To a consulting firm that has been quietly acquiring debt tied to several Hayes-controlled properties. Trevor sat up straighter. Why would anyone do that? I looked at Dominic. Because taking money from you is small thinking. The room went still again. Controlling what happens when something goes wrong is much bigger. Dominic's voice lowered. Explain. I hated this part. The part where a theory stopped being clever and started becoming real. Someone has been collecting 3 things at once. Your schedule, internal payment permissions, financial obligations connected to the clan's legitimate businesses. I paused. That is not theft. That is preparation. Victor finally spoke. Preparation for what? I looked at him. His tone was calm, but one hand had tightened around the arm of his chair. Tiny movement. Most people would miss it. 5 years in forensic work had ruined me beautifully. A transfer of control, I said. Trevor laughed once, but there was no humor in it. You mean a takeover? Possibly, but not the loud kind. I turned the laptop toward Dominic. If enough of these companies were pressured at the same time, if enough scheduled meetings were manipulated, if enough advisors received conflicting information, the clan could start making bad decisions without realizing those decisions were being shaped. Dominic stared. At the screen. Someone wants us fighting ourselves. Yes. That was the part that bothered me most. Not because it was clever, because it was patient. Whoever built this had expected the clan's strongest instincts to do the rest. Pride, suspicion, loyalty, fear of looking weak. Victor leaned back. This is still speculation. Mostly, I nodded. But there is one thing that is not. I opened a document attached to one of the vendor records. A legal authorization draft. It looked routine until I checked the metadata. Then my stomach dropped. Dominic noticed. What? I read the date twice. This document was prepared 3 months ago. So, it authorizes emergency control over several Hayes assets if you are considered unavailable. Every face at the table changed. Dominic's did not. That was worse. Who authorized it? Trevor asked. Nobody yet. I looked closer. Then I saw the signature field. Filled. Actually, that is not true. Dominic stood slowly. Ryan. I looked up at him. Your signature is already on it. Silence. Complete silence. Even Victor stopped breathing for half a second. Dominic reached for the laptop. I turned it toward him. The signature looked perfect because it was his. Not scanned. Not obviously copied. Real. I could tell from the certificate data attached to it. My pulse climbed. This is not about watching where you go anymore, I said quietly. Someone has been building a legal path to take control of the clan's businesses if you are removed from the decision-making process. Dominic stared at his own signature. I never signed this document. I believed him. That was exactly why I was afraid. Then someone did something much smarter than forging it, I said. They built the lie around something you actually signed. Dominic stared at the screen for several seconds before he spoke. Find the original. I nodded. That was exactly what I needed him to say. Not accuse. Not panic. Find the original. I need every version of the document that carried this signature, I said. Drafts, attachments, email records, approval history, everything. His assistant moved immediately. Victor shifted in his chair. This is becoming excessive. I looked at him. A document that can transfer control of several major assets is not usually where I practice restraint. Trevor leaned back, visibly tense now. If Dominic did not sign that version, how can his signature be valid? Because signatures attach to files through systems people trust, I said. Sometimes the dangerous part is not the signature itself. It is what happens around the document before and after it is approved. Dominic turned toward me. So I signed something. Probably. And someone built this around it. That is my working theory. He looked down at the table. For the first time all evening, He seemed less like the man everyone expected to have an answer, and more like someone realizing that trust could leave fingerprints. I should have caught it. I hated the way he said that. Quiet. Flat. Personal. No, Dominic looked at me. Ryan. No, I kept my voice calm. You do not get to turn this into proof that you were careless. His jaw tightened. My signature is on a document I never saw. Exactly. That is carelessness. Or it is evidence that someone designed a process around how you normally approve things. The room stayed silent. I continued before he could argue. If somebody studies your habits long enough, they do not need you to make a stupid mistake. They only need you to behave consistently. Dominic's expression changed slightly. They built the lie around the way I trust people. Yes. The answer felt heavier than I wanted it to. Victor looked away for the first time. I noticed. Of course I did. 5 minutes later, the original file arrived. I opened it and felt my shoulders tighten. Here, Dominic came around the table and stood beside me. The first document was legitimate. Routine authorization for temporary management of 2 business accounts during a tax review. Dominic had signed it 4 months earlier. The language was narrow, specific, harmless. Then came a second version created 6 days later. Same document number, same signature certificate, different attached schedule, wider authority, more assets. Someone changed the attached terms, Trevor said. Yes. I opened the third version, and then widened them. Again, Dominic's voice dropped. How many versions? 5. I clicked through them. Each one expanded control a little more. Not enough to scream fraud. Just enough to become dangerous when combined. Victor folded his arms. Who had permission to revise the schedules? I checked. Legal administration, executive operations, and senior advisory. Dominic looked around the table. Which means, too many people for this to be useful by itself. I checked the timestamps. Then something strange appeared. One revision had been made at 2:14 in the morning. Another at 2:19. A third at 2:23. That is interesting. Trevor groaned. I have learned to hate when you say that. Healthy response. Dominic leaned closer. What did you find? The edits were made in sequence from the same internal approval channel. Whose? I followed the authorization trail. One administrative account. Shared access. Bad security practice. Very convenient for whoever wanted confusion. Not enough to identify a person. Victor exhaled softly. Almost relieved. That bothered me more than guilt would have. I opened the access history again. There was another pattern. Every edited document had been viewed by one senior advisor within minutes of the change. Victor. Again. I looked at him. He met my eyes calmly. You have something to say? Not yet. Dominic studied my face. Ryan. I closed the laptop halfway. If I accuse the wrong person now, whoever built this wins. Trevor frowned. How? Because the entire plan depends on this family doing what powerful people do when they feel betrayed. Which is? Dominic asked. I looked around the table. Stop trusting everyone at once. Nobody argued. That told me enough. I turned back to Dominic. If you react emotionally, they control the next move. His eyes stayed on mine. What do you want me to do? There it was. The question no alpha at this table had expected Dominic Hayes to ask in Omega. I breathed out slowly. Nothing yet. Trevor stared. Nothing. Nothing obvious. I looked at Dominic. Keep the room calm. Keep everyone where they are. Let me verify one more thing before anyone makes a decision. Dominic did not hesitate. Done. Victor's expression finally changed. Just a little. Not fear. Calculation. And that was when I knew the next thing I tested could not be financial. It had to be human. I needed a human pattern, not another spreadsheet. Numbers were patient. People were not. That was usually where they made mistakes. I need 3 versions of the same update, I said. Trevor looked at me like I had announced a magic trick. What update? Something harmless. Something believable. Something nobody outside this room should know. Dominic folded his arms. You want to test the leak. I want to test information flow. That sounds suspiciously like the same thing. It sounds more professional. He almost smiled. Victor did not. I asked Dominic's assistant to prepare 3 slightly different internal notices about a routine business review scheduled for the following morning. Same meeting. Same purpose. Different locations. One version said the downtown office. One said the River North Conference Suite. One said the hotel boardroom where we were sitting now. No money. No threat. No operational value. Just 3 versions of harmless information. Then I divided the 6 senior people with access into 3 pairs. Dominic watched me do it without interrupting. That mattered. 10 minutes earlier, every alpha in the room had expected him to take control. Now he was letting me set the pace. Each pair gets one version, I said. Nobody forwards it. Nobody discusses it outside this room. Trevor frowned. And then what? Then we wait. I hate waiting. That is because waiting does not flatter alpha instincts. Dominic gave me a look. Careful. I said instincts, not intelligence. Trevor muttered. That was not better. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. The room settled into an uncomfortable silence broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional tap of someone's shoe against the floor. I drank coffee that had gone cold and watched faces instead of screens. Victor appeared calm. Too calm. Trevor looked openly miserable. One older advisor kept checking the clock. Dominic stayed beside me instead of at the head of the table. That was new too. You are sure? This works? He asked quietly. No, he turned toward me. You are admitting uncertainty? Please document the historic occasion. Ryan. I lowered my voice. It works if the person leaking information still believes the system is safe. If they think we know too much, they stop moving. Dominic nodded. So we make them comfortable. Exactly. His phone buzzed. Everyone looked at him. Not mine, he said after checking it. 30 seconds later, his assistant's laptop chimed. She opened a message from outside counsel and went very still. Mr. Hayes. Dominic stepped closer. What? She turned the screen. Our attorneys received a forwarded communication from the consulting firm tied to those vendor companies. They referenced tomorrow's internal review. My pulse jumped. Which location? She read it twice. River North. Trevor looked around the table. Who got River North? I already knew. 2 people. Victor Shaw and Martin Ellis, a senior operations advisor who had barely spoken all evening. Martin's face drained of color. Victor stayed composed. Too composed. Dominic looked at me. That narrows it. Not enough. Trevor stared at me. How is that not enough? Because either person could have shared it, or one could have repeated it to someone else. Martin shook his head immediately. I did not tell anyone. Victor looked at him with mild disappointment. Neither did I. Interesting. Martin defended himself. Victor performed calm. Different instincts. I asked the assistant to check the outside counsel message metadata and prior correspondence history. Nothing dramatic. No secret hacking. Just ordinary business records already collected by the legal team. 5 minutes later, she found the problem. The forwarded note referenced not only River North, but the exact wording from the version sent to Victor and Martin. A phrase I had deliberately made awkward. Quarterly succession review. Dominic noticed my expression. You planted that phrase. Yes. Victor's eyes sharpened. Martin looked confused. Why? Because nobody naturally says quarterly succession review. Trevor gave a weak laugh. It does sound terrible. Thank you. I kept my eyes on Victor. And there is more. The legal team had attached a timestamp showing when the outside firm received the information. 9 minutes after Victor and Martin got their version. I checked the room access log. Martin had been speaking with Dominic's assistant during most of that window. Victor had stepped away briefly to take what he called a personal call near the side door. Still not proof, but the pattern was narrowing. Dominic's voice turned quiet. Victor. Victor met his gaze. Yes. Who did you call? Victor paused. Barely. Less than a second. But I saw it. My driver. I looked at Dominic's assistant. Can we verify that through normal records? She nodded. Victor's expression changed again. That tiny calculation returned. He knew what came next. There is no need, he said. Actually, I replied, there is. Dominic did not speak over me. He did not step forward. He did not reclaim the room. He simply looked at me and said, keep going. Something shifted in every face around the table. Not because Dominic trusted me privately, because he was doing it publicly. I turned back to Victor. If your call was harmless, the records will show that. Victor's calm finally cracked around the edges. And if they do not, I held his gaze. Then we stop asking whether there is a leak. I let the silence sit for one beat. And start asking why someone you have trusted for years decided to become one. Victor did not answer immediately. That was the first answer. The second came 30 seconds later when Dominic's assistant looked up from the phone record and said, the call did not go to his driver. Nobody moved. Victor's face stayed composed, but the room had changed around him. Who did it go to? Dominic asked. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. A number connected to the consulting firm. Trevor exhaled hard. Martin looked at Victor like someone had replaced a familiar face with a stranger. I felt no satisfaction. That surprised me. I had spent years solving cases like this, and I remembered the strange emptiness that came after being right. Patterns were clean. People were not. Victor finally looked at Dominic. You do not understand. Dominic's jaw tightened. Then, explain it. I was trying to protect what your father built. Trevor actually laughed once. By selling Dominic's schedule? Victor ignored him. This family was becoming weak. Too cautious. Too dependent on outsiders. Lawyers. Compliance officers. Consultants. His eyes moved to me. There it was. The word he did not say. Omega. And you thought manipulating the businesses would make them stronger? I asked. Victor looked at me as if I were still the least important person in the room. I thought pressure would force Dominic to lead the way he was meant to. Dominic stepped forward. I stood before I realized I was doing it. Not to block him. Just to remind him I was there. Do not give him what he expects, I said quietly. Dominic looked at me. What does he expect? Anger. A dramatic decision. Everyone choosing sides. The clan turning inward. Victor's expression hardened. Good. I had finally hit the right nerve. I continued. That is the whole structure. He creates uncertainty, then waits for powerful people to react emotionally. The reaction does the damage for him. Dominic stared at Victor for a long moment. Then he stepped back. Ryan, what do we do? The room went silent for a different reason. Victor looked genuinely stunned. Dominic Hayes had not asked the oldest advisor. He had asked me. I breathed slowly. First, revoke Victor's access to every business system. Dominic nodded to his assistant. Done. Second, freeze any pending changes connected to those vendor companies until outside counsel reviews them. Another nod. Third, preserve every record exactly as it is and let the legal team handle the investigation. Trevor frowned. That is it. That is the boring part. And the exciting part? There is no exciting part. I looked around the table. That is how we win. A few alphas looked disappointed, which was almost funny. No revenge. Trevor asked. No dramatic confrontation? You are currently standing in a luxury hotel conference room arguing about compliance records. I think we survived enough drama. Dominic almost smiled, but his eyes stayed tired. Victor shook his head. You are letting an Omega dismantle decades of family tradition. Dominic turned toward him. No, his voice was calm. I am letting the person who found the problem help me fix it. That landed harder than shouting would have. Victor looked away. Dominic's assistant confirmed the first access restrictions were in place. Outside counsel had already contacted the relevant financial institutions. The questionable authorizations were suspended pending review. The business locations that reported access problems were stable. No crisis. No collapse. Just systems being repaired one careful decision at a time. Trevor sat down slowly. So that is it. Not yet, I said. There is still one thing. Dominic looked at me. What? I opened the original transaction file again. The pattern that had bothered me from the beginning was finally obvious. The payments had not only confirmed schedule information, they also corresponded with internal leadership changes. Promotions, new advisors, committee appointments. Victor had been mapping loyalty inside the clan for almost a year. He was not only watching you, I said. Dominic's expression tightened. Who else? Everyone. The room went quiet. I turned the laptop so they could see. He was tracking who supported which decisions, who gained access, who lost influence, who might follow you if control changed. Martin sat back, stunned. Trevor looked genuinely sick. Victor said nothing. Dominic stared at the screen, then at the men around the table. So he was preparing for the family to split. Yes. And if I had reacted tonight by accusing everyone, you would have finished the job for him. Dominic closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them again. You saved more than the businesses. I hated compliments when I was tired. They made me suspicious. I found an ugly spreadsheet. Ryan. Fine. Several ugly spreadsheets. Trevor laughed softly. This time, nobody laughed at me. Dominic looked around the table. Listen carefully. Nobody leaves here tonight blaming an entire family for one man's choices. Nobody turns suspicion into policy. We fix the systems. We verify the facts. We move forward. Then he looked at me. And every decision about this investigation goes through. Ryan. That was the moment everything changed. Not when Victor was exposed. Not when the accounts were protected. Not when the false documents were stopped. It changed when a room full of alphas who had spent the evening treating me like decoration looked at me and waited for what I would say next. 3 weeks later, I walked into the same conference room and immediately noticed one thing. My chair was gone. Not moved. Gone. Dominic. He looked up from the head of the table with the calm expression of a man who had definitely done something irritating on purpose. Ryan, where's my chair? Trevor, already seated halfway down the table, suddenly became fascinated by his coffee. Dominic gestured beside him. There was a new chair there. Same leather. Same height. Very expensive. Extremely obvious. No, I said. Dominic raised an eyebrow. You have not even sat down. I understand symbolism. I also understand traps. It is a chair. That is exactly what a trap would say. Trevor laughed into his cup. The room felt different from the last time I had been here. Quieter in a better way. Victor was gone from every business system, every advisory position, every internal committee. Outside counsel had finished securing the disputed documents, and the questionable vendor relationships had been suspended. Nobody had rushed. Nobody had torn the family apart. The clan had survived because, for once, everyone had chosen verification over pride. I looked at the new seat again. You really moved me beside you. Yes. Why? Dominic closed the folder in front of him. Because that is where you belong. I hated when he said serious things without warning. It gave me no time to prepare sarcasm. That sounds dangerously sentimental. You can survive it. Unclear. I sat down anyway. Several older alphas watched me with expressions I could not quite name. Respect, maybe. Reluctant acceptance, definitely. One of them cleared his throat. So this seat is for Dominic's Omega now? The old irritation arrived automatically. Familiar. Sharp. Before I could answer, Dominic did. No, the room went still. He looked at the man, then at me. It is for my partner. I forgot how to breathe normally for half a second. Trevor smiled into his coffee. I recovered. Mostly. You practiced that. Dominic looked offended. I did not. You absolutely practiced that. Ryan. There was probably a mirror involved. A few people laughed. Not at me. With me. That still felt strange. The older alpha nodded slowly. Partner, then. Better. Much better. Dominic opened the meeting. The first agenda item was new financial controls. The second was access review. The third was governance reform, which sounded painfully boring and therefore excellent. I had spent years learning that the safest systems were usually the least dramatic ones. Dominic surprised everyone by proposing that no single senior advisor should hold unchecked authority over schedules, legal documents, or financial exceptions again. Trevor looked at me. Your influence is terrifying. I prefer administratively inconvenient. Dominic turned toward me. Ryan will oversee the independent review process. I stared at him. Excuse me. You heard me. You did not ask. He paused. Good. Very good. Would you oversee the review process? I considered him for a moment. Part-time. Agreed. And I choose the team. Agreed. And nobody calls me at 2 in the morning because they found a suspicious invoice. Reasonable. That was too easy. I am learning. Something warm settled in my chest. Not ownership. Not protection. Trust. The kind that made room instead of taking it. The meeting continued for another hour. Nobody questioned why I spoke. Nobody slid paperwork toward me as a joke. When I corrected a reporting error, Trevor immediately wrote it down. When I challenged a proposal, Dominic asked me to explain instead of defending it. Small things. Ordinary things. Somehow those mattered most. At the end, everyone began gathering folders and closing laptops. I stayed seated for a moment, looking at the table where, 3 weeks earlier, I had been treated like decoration. Dominic waited beside me. Ready? He asked. Almost. I glanced around the room. You know what is funny? Usually something at my expense. They thought I was useless because I was quiet. Dominic smiled faintly. They? No better now. I stood and picked up my folder. Good. Why? I looked at him. Because half of them still cannot read a balance sheet. Trevor, walking past us, groaned. I heard that. Then there is hope for you. He laughed and kept walking. Dominic opened the door, but he did not step through first. He waited. I looked at him. He looked back. No command. No gesture telling me where to stand. Just space. Choice. I walked through beside him. Weeks ago, I had entered this world as the Omega everyone expected to stay quiet. Now the clan had new safeguards, new rules, and one very uncomfortable truth written into every room I entered. I had never needed them to make me powerful. I had only needed them to stop pretending I was not.